Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Hardy Burke Internet Broadcast Network, and we are continuing our series of the Power Hour with Danny L. Smith, certified John Maxwell coach and mortgage loan officer for over 30 years. And if you want to join us or you want to catch up, you might want to go check us out in our Facebook group. If you happen to listen to this link on some other site besides the Facebook group, go check out the Power Hour broadcast, Danny L. Smith. That's our Facebook group. We'll be happy to add you. It's a public group, and you can catch up on the 13 podcasts we've already done. And tonight I'm supposed to ask Danny something. Danny, I'm supposed to ask you what color boots you're wearing and why you're wearing those boots. Take it away, Danny.
Actually, you said what we're going to talk about was, you asked me what we were going to talk about, and I said we're going to talk about why I wear the color boots I wear.
Right.
And then I asked you why you wear your red
shoe. Right.
And you said it was part of your brand. Is that right?
Exactly. That's right.
Why is that part of your brand?
Because it draws attention, and people always ask me, do you wear those shoes every day? And I went, yes. Because people notice them, and they ask questions, which builds part of my brand. And they're going to start seeing some of that stuff, Danny, in the upcoming future. So now I want to hear the answers.
Yeah, I know you've been doing a little rebranding, and somebody working on that. So cool.
Yep. So I'm
you ever
excited.
look back on? Let me ask you this. You ever look back on your life and you ever think about the way you acted as a child?
Yes.
Do you act differently then than you do now?
Yes.
You're afraid to say too much.
Well, no. I mean, as a child, I had a lot of good things going for me. I played sports. I was super active. I was very, very competitive, and some of that has calmed down. But, I am different because I've grown up some, and I think a little bit different than I did then. But, yes, I mean, my childhood was really good.
You say you've grown up. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, from the fact of the standpoint that I've probably gained a little bit more wisdom and decision-making, I would say that if you really started asking me about the second half of my life from, say, college up, I might tell you there's some issues there. So really the question is if I could go back and do it again, but that's not possible. So it's moved forward, and what I have gained is some wisdom and some growth. And
you feel you're more logical than you were as a kid?
I would say that the logical part, I try to balance it, and I don't want to get too logical because I think just being logical is not a good balance. But part of that is that growth, yes. That help?
Yeah. What?
So this is going to be Q&A Hurdy tonight. Okay, cool.
I'm thinking about where I want to. There's 3 or 4 paths I could go here. Hurdy, I think about. Let me say this first. In January, in January and February, I took a class from a man named Paul Martinelli. He's a mentor. He's also the president of the John Maxwell team. And in his private practice, if you will, his training, coaching practice, he had this class that I took. It was over 8 Saturdays. There was a couple of videos he put out during the week. The class on Saturday was a conference call, some training on Saturday morning for a while, and then there would be some Q&A. One of the classes one of those sessions was a timeline. And I think you and I have talked about this. I think I did something about CBLG. on that. And the timeline was that you start with the day. You do a timeline on a piece of paper. You put 20 years out into the future. Then you on the right side and on the left side, you put the day you were born. And then you come in there and you mark dates. You put dates of successes that you had. Remember that?
Yeah.
And the whole idea was to look at your successes. So I want to talk very quickly here over the next 20 minutes about my timeline and some realizations that I've come to. And one thing I've realized is why I like wearing, don't wear them every day, but why I like wearing the boots I wear, and the color boots I wear. I wear a color. I've got a briefcase that I bought years ago, the same color, and I just thought I liked that color, and I do like that color. What I've realized about why it's kind of I call it a saddle. It's a lighter brown, medium brown. I think it's more of a pure leather type color that's been oiled well. Okay, that's the color I think of when I think of this color. So, but I got to go back first to when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, and now we're talking about successes here, and remembering successes and the power of remembering successes. You and I both know we can get into our pity parties, and we can get into the failures that we've had. We can get into the what if onlys of our past. What if I hadn't done this, if I'd have done this instead of that? I've made some great decisions. I'd say most of the decisions that I've made the last 20 years were great decisions. They just some of them had some very poor results. And so I mean, I sought counsel. It's very seldom I just make a brash decision. I will seek counsel. I'll pray about it. I will look at my the ifs and the ands and the buts about it. And I've been accused to think about it too much, but make a good decision. Like I said, I just had some of this had some really poor results. So it's really easy to go through that type of stuff and look at your failures. We tend to think about human beings. Our nature is to think about all of the bad stuff way too much, even beat ourselves up about it. But there's something powerful about that timeline of successes. And mine's now in a notebook where I've got, I have to go pull it out, 4 or 5, 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper taped end to end, folded up back in that notebook. And I've taken these dates of successes and I just put numbers by them. And then I go into the notebook and I number each page and then write out what that success was and think about that success. Think about the environment I was in, what was going on in my life, what made it a success. And it's a very cool exercise. Started that 18 months ago. Still do it today. I've got a note here, that I thought about today to put in there. But it's taken me on a pretty good journey. And one of the successes I thought about was when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, I wanted a horse. Herdy, I wanted that horse so bad you wouldn't believe how bad I wanted that horse. When I was in the first grade, I got my first horse.
Right.
I got my second horse, a bigger horse. It was half something and half quarter horse. Her name was Brandy. I'm sorry, I think it was a he named Brandy, actually. And yes, it was a male named Brandy. And And Brandy and I spent a lot of time together out in the woods. I've had a corral for him out in the woods, and I role played being a cowboy. But you know what? By the time I was 9 years old, I'd started wanting a motorcycle, and everything was about motorcycles. Still did the horse thing, but I wanted a motorcycle. And my dad said there was two things I would never have. One was a paper route. The other was a motorcycle. When I was 13 years old, I talked him into a paper route. Now, let me back up for a second. I wanted a motorcycle. You could tell I wanted a motorcycle. If I wasn't outside on Brandy, I was drawing motorcycles. Now all the tanks on my motorcycles, I think, had stars and stripes. Peace, love, the whole James or the whole Peter Fonda, peace, love. Remember Easy Rider and the chopper? What a worthless bike for the most part is a chopper. Things are dangerous. They slip and they slide. You can't turn very fast. But, man, they were cool looking. When I was 13 years old, I taught my dad and let me have a paper route. When I was 14 years old, I used that money to help me buy a motorcycle. Those are some successes that I had in life. It wasn't very logical that a 6-year-old would have a horse and would be turned loose the way I did, the way my parents turned me loose with that. But I was creative in ways to talk them in to get me a horse and then get me another horse and then get me having a motorcycle. So I was being creative. When jump forward to 1998, I had a business idea for a mortgage company. And at that time, I'd been in the mortgage business 14 years. And I had an idea for a mortgage company that was different than any other mortgage company that was out there. Seriously, it was. And that was that I wanted to do 30, 50 loans a month, and I wanted to probably wanted about 10 loan officers, maybe 15, to do those. And what was different was I was going to pay those loan officers every day. Every day that they closed a loan, they closed a loan today, today's Monday, they would get paid on Wednesday, W-2 wages. If they close 5 loans a month, they get 5 paychecks. They close 10 loans a month, they get 10 paychecks. I wasn't going to try to keep their money and hoard their money and try to do weird things with their money. Now, what's different is in the mortgage business, like I am today, was back then a loan officer got paid on the 15th for the previous month's production. So everything I close this month in October, I'll get paid November 15th. So that's running anywhere from 15 to 45 days behind. You get paid. You close a loan on the first of one month, get paid on the 15th next month. It's 44, 45 days before you get paid on that loan, that work that you did, right? That was logically the way it would work. I started, it was me and a partner. We started the business. Our first real employee other than a loan officer was another accountant. And, as we started talking to accountants started saying, well, you can't do that, Danny. Maybe you can do it at 20, 30, even 50 loans a month, but you can't do that at 75 and 100 loans a month. And I said, why not? Well, you did W-2 wages and withholdings, a way to balance that out and keep that going right. So at the end of the year, it's just a lot of work. And I said, it's just numbers, right? Mm-hmm. They were logical. I was creative. I went to ADP. ADP said, can't do it. Our system won't work like that. Nobody does like that. And I had a few people, I don't know if ADP was one of them, but I had a few people tell me I was stupid for even wanting to do it. But for me, it was an advantage in hiring loan officers. There were loan officers that were coming to us to go to work for us simply because we would pay them so quick. In other words, we weren't trying to operate off of their profits, off of their income. It wasn't logical, but I was creative about it. Already want to jump. That was 1998. Moved in 1999 and 2000. Jump forward to about 2000 and 2006. We did $800 million worth of business, doing over 400 loans a month, and we became ADP's largest client in whatever region this is called. ADP decided, because we were doing so much business, we wanted to pay them to do our payroll, that they figured out a way to do it. It wasn't logical, but they got creative. I ran into a guy a few months ago. He and I were talking, and he said, you look familiar, your name's familiar. And I said, yeah, I don't know. I think I got one of those faces. And we started talking, and he was on and off his phone. He said, I got it figured out. He said, I was one of the account reps at ADP. I wasn't your account rep. I had another account rep when we started doing your payroll. He said, we thought that you guys were stupid. There's no way you could be doing what you were doing. And then every once in a while we find out how much more you were doing. We figured out we had to come up with a way to be able to handle your business. You think about it.
That's cool.
Okay, we were creative. We weren't logical. That was in 1998 through 2006. We held 2007, 8, 9, 10. Hurdy, there's something about this logic versus creativity. I'm 62 years old. When I started that business, I was 45. I don't think today, if I had that idea, I don't know that I could be that persistent and that creative that I was back then. And that's been bothering me the last couple of years. And then I took that class from Paul Martinelli. I did that timeline. I started thinking about these successes and some other successes. Hurdy, I got out of the Navy in 76. In 77, I bought a dive shop. Actually, the first year I just ran a dive shop. I had started selling water skis out of my bedroom, and I was looking for a place to sell those from a store, and I figured I'd run something. So I started running a dive shop. A year later, I bought that dive shop. Hurdy, when I started running that dive shop, I didn't know how to scuba dive. I bought it in the summer. That winter, we needed more income during the winter, so I bought a bunch of snow skis and started renting snow skis. I didn't know how to rent snow. I didn't know how to ski. I'd never been snow skiing. But I was creative. Logically, people said, you can't be doing that. There's all kinds of stuff. You got to learn to set those bindings correct so you don't break people's ankles and blah, 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 blah. I said, I can learn it. We go through this process, and what happens is that we do these things when we're younger because, quote unquote, we don't know better. I don't think it's that we don't know better. I knew I didn't know how to do all that. I just wasn't willing to accept the fact that I couldn't do it, that I wasn't going to do it. Jump forward to October of 2016. And I was reading a book called The Circle Maker by Mark Batterson. And it's a book about prayer. And in there, he said, one of the biggest problems that we have is that as Christians and as we mature and as we get older, we stop praying so much. And we stop praying so much because we start thinking too logically. And he said, and we start thinking too logically because the part of our brain that thinks logically becomes more active as we get older. The part of our brain that thinks creatively, the activity diminishes. Herdy, I remember putting that book down, grabbing my computer, and I started Googling it. And because, some things were coming together. I remember Paul Martinelli talking about some similar type stuff. The empowerment mentoring program that I had taken from him and gotten licensed to teach, it kind of alluded to that. The whole thing around the stick man and the subconsciousness, the drawing of the stick man, of the subconsciousness, and it's in our subconsciousness that our reality resides. It's in our, and it's our subconscious that our behavior and our actions and our behavior that equals our results. It flows out of our subconscious. But yet, depending on which study you believe, 90 to 97%. There's one study that says 90%, another study that says 95 to 97. So let's just say showing that 90 to 97% of our thoughts every day are repetitive. Go, what? Wow. I remember hearing that and go, what? Google that up. A Stanford professor that has the 90%, forget the 95 to 97 group right now, but that 90 to 97% of our thoughts every day are competitive. Yet I'm 62 years old, and I'm wanting to get it on. I'm wanting to make things happen like I've never wanted to really before, but I've been feeling held back for a long time. Then I read that book. About praying big, and Batterson is claiming that we don't think creatively enough. The part of our brain that thinks creatively, that thinks big, that prays big, that we don't do that enough because we're too logical as we get older. But yet, and here's the key part. It might be a natural process, but it's not genetic like gray hair and wrinkles. Meaning we can change our thinking. That's what neuroplasticity is about. First book my wife ever saw me buy 31 years ago. The second book was What to Say When You Talk to Yourself by Shad Helmstetter. He has since written a book called Neuroplasticity and the Power of Change, something like that. And they didn't call it neuroplasticity back, 31 years ago, and now they do. So I start thinking about all of this. And the books I've read over the last few years, I go back to a book by John Piper that I read 3 years ago called Think. And it's about thinking into Scripture. And I read or listened to one of his books this summer that it's called Reading the Bible Supernaturally. When I'm listening to that book, I'm thinking about how creative this is. It's not logical. You think about prayer. Prayer's not logical to begin with. I just thought about that. Is it? Prayer's not logical. There's nothing logical about it. Some people would say that it's all creativity. It's a made up. So we start working through this, and and I realize that my biggest lid that I've got on me, that I have a self-imposed lid. Rule number one, the laws of leadership is the law of the lid. The number one lid I've got is the logic thinking that I have. The logical thinking. I need to be more creative about my thinking. Herdy, I've read quite a few books over the last year and a half. I took that class. Powerful book I read was this Circle Maker by Mark Batterson. Coming into 2017, I decided I was going to read 2 books back to back. One was John Maxwell's book, Intentional Living. I knew I had to be more intentional about what I was doing. The other book was No Limits. John wrote Intentional Living in 2016, 15, wrote No Limits in 2017. I had not read either one. And I thought, you know what? And I just felt led to read both of those books back to back. And I did. The No Limits book led me to a book called Living with a SEAL by Jesse Eichler. No Limits led me to a book called Switch on Your Brain by Dr. Caroline Leaf. Through the process of reading Intentional Living, then specifically No Limits, and then Living with a SEAL, let's talk about living for 30 days with a Navy SEAL, with the Navy SEAL having full control of what you do every day, I realized that I was a mental wimp. You know, we hear about mental toughness. I'd become a mental wimp, and it dawned. Now, to be honest with you, to be transparent here, I didn't really realize. I read this was all back in May and June, and it dawned on me just last week how much of a mental wimp. I hadn't even used that word, hadn't consciously thought about that word. That I'd become a mental wimp.
Now,
and that,
I'm going
go ahead.
I'm going to interrupt you for a minute. What
Please.
do you mean?
Yeah, go ahead.
What do you mean by mental whip? Do you mean like you just weren't developing intentions, your mind, or you weren't growing on your mind? What do you mean exactly by that?
You know, I think I was growing great.
Okay.
I think I've grown leaps and bounds. You know, one of my mainstay philosophies since the early 90s has been what Zig Ziglar said, that you're going to be the same 5 years from today as you are today, except for books you read, what you watch, what you listen to, and who you hang out with.
There you go. Okay.
That's been a mainstay for me for a long time. I have grown in knowledge, but I had become a mental wimp. I couldn't stick to anything for very long.
Gotcha. Okay.
That's a good question. I hadn't really thought about that, but you know, I think I've thought about it. But let me just expound on that a little bit. I know I've thought about it, but I haven't voiced it. But what I mean is that I was talking myself out of doing things. You know, I came out of the executive management of the mortgage business and would go out on the streets, and then my coaching and training, which I love doing. Things would start going one direction, and after the excitement wears off, and then you got to kind of buckle down a little bit with a new job, a new career. I started wanting to move into one direction, then another, and the stick-to-itiveness, if you will, I just wasn't. I wasn't focused.
So the mental capacity to focus through that part of it's what you're really talking about.
Yeah, and I was using my brother would say, it would tell me, hey, you're just thinking about this. You're overthinking about this. But let me say it this way. I was being too logical. I'm going to come right back to that. I was being too logical about what I wanted to do. You know, one thing I've learned reading about Navy SEALs, you know, this book and read some others, The Lone Survivor, Marcus, what's his name?
Luttrell. Yep.
Luttrell. And those guys that go through SEAL training, no one argues that they are the best athletes in the world, the best athletes ever trained. What they go through to even get to that period, what is that, a 2-week period? And to go through that, leading up to Hell Week and Buds, they are the best athletes in the world, but 90% of them fail. And they will tell you that it's because they're not mentally tough enough.
Yeah. Makes sense.
My mental toughness, the stick-to-itiveness to work through it. David Goggins' SEAL in the book, Living with a SEAL, and by the way, when the book was first published, when Eisler hired him to live with him for 30 days, one of the conditions was that he would not tell anybody his name. And when he wrote the book 3 or 4 years later, he just mentioned SEAL. He's since gotten permission. I think Goggins has retired, and he's since got permission to use his name. And the new book, you buy it now, has a new chapter at the end and identifies who he is. Eisler or Goggins says in there that when you think you can't go any further, he's talking about your physical, you're out working out, you're running, you're going through whatever, you're only 40% there. When you think you've had enough, you're only 40% there.
Right.
So, by the way, great book, a lot of bad language in it. So, but incredible book in I think it's incredible. I would recommend it to some guys. A couple of guys that read it that thought it was kind of boring. I can't imagine that book being boring. I can't imagine. I don't get it. Somebody, if you read that book and it doesn't fire you up, you're hopeless. So, but it's the mental toughness, and that's what I realized, that I mentally wasn't tough. And I logically would talk myself out of things. Logically. I need to be I need to be that 6-year-old boy talking his dad into his first horse. Or talking my dad into a paper route, and I mean, my dad had a bad wreck at one point in his life on a motorcycle, and my dad had a paper route for 2 or 3 years. And I remember, I mean, this is after, I was big enough to go with him on this paper route. And it's 2 things he said I'd never have, but yet I talked him into it. Salesmanship, maybe a little marketing. I'm sure there's a lot of closes. Talking a guy into running a dive shop, you didn't know how to scuba dive? Are you kidding me? I remember calling the guy up. I wanted to buy some snow skis. He started asking me questions, and he realized I'm wanting to buy skis, bindings, boots. And I told him how much money I had to spend, and he's going, wait a minute, you've never been, what makes you, and I said, you can come, you're in Dallas, you can come down here and you can show me how to set all this up. And I was wanting to make money. It was slow time of the year.
Right.
So I mean, think about that creativity. The creativity, and anybody listening to this that knows W-2 wages and keeping track of that W-2 wages, and it's why they set you up on a weekly, twice a month, monthly payroll, because your withholdings have to come out in a certain rhythm, if you will. So it took creativity to make that work right, just to hire people to do it. So why do I wear this colored boots that I wear?
Yeah.
Paul Martinelli asked the question one time in that class. He said, why do you tie your shoes the way you tie your shoes? And I remember going, what? He says, and he repeated it, why do you tie your shoes the way you tie your shoes? What if you wanted to tie them differently? If you want to tie them differently, your brain has to change. You have to change your brain. I wear these colored boots. I used to not. For years, I wore only black boots. I've got 2 pair of black boots up in my closet that I never wear. Oh, I might a couple times a year. Don't want to wear them. what changed me? I think a couple of things. I think the main thing that changed was that growing up, why did I wear black boots even? Growing up, I watched Bonanza every Sunday night, and I liked Adam Cartwright. My dad liked Ben Cartwright.
I liked Hoss.
You like Hoss, yeah. And I've looked like Hoss a couple of times in my life. And Hoss was big. Anybody's listening, Boss was a big guy, okay? Tough, big. And I wore black, and I think that's why I wore black. I think that somewhere along the line, I started identifying more with Ben than I started identifying with Hoss. I go back and I look at my successes in life and the environment I was in, and I was always creative. There was always something else going on there that I was rooted in. I grew up reading Louis L'Amour Westerns. I've got his full collection. I think I have every book Louis L'Amour ever wrote. Some of them over here in a bookcase, some out the paperbacks in a box in the garage. So what is it, and this is what I want to leave this call with, is what are the successes in life? And what successes can you tie back into to help move forward better? We have departure points that have got. I had to come to realize that, and it's becoming more apparent to me on I hadn't thought about this until today for a few weeks, maybe a couple of months. But Paul Martinelli said that you've had to go through everything in life that you've gone through to be who you are today. Okay, all right, I can buy that. But if I pay attention to the successes more than I pay attention to the failures,
right?
If I think about the successes, I don't have time to think about the failures. I can use those success departure points to arrive at better arrival points out in the future. We're going to be talking more about this in a future call. But to make any sense at all, Herdy?
Yeah, you remember when I told you when we discussed this some time ago, I told you that, remember in the Bible when Paul used racing as a way to tell a story, because he must have watched a lot of athletic things, right? He said he was always pressing toward the finish line, which meant he never had time to look over his shoulder and worry about what mistakes he had made. He was always pressing forward, right?
Yeah.
And I just read an interesting statement. Adam Grant, I'm reading his book, Give and Take, and I've been following him on LinkedIn. He just posted something about creativity today. You ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
Creativity stems less from seeking new solutions and more from seeking new problems. To develop fresh ideas, diversify your experience.
Okay, yeah, let's say that again.
Creativity stems less from seeking new solutions and more from seeking new problems. To develop fresh ideas, diversify your experience. And then here's the comic he has. He's got a boss looking over at his coworker, and he says, "The wheel was great. What have you done for me lately?" Sorry, I like that.
And no doubt, our creativity brings forth problems.
Right.
I think it's our logic that keeps us from pressing on because we don't want to deal with problems, but yet we don't get the advantage of the creativity of what the advantage of what the problems bring, right?
Right. Right. And so we start using logic and saying that this will never work. This is too hard. I'm really struggling down this road. I'm going broke. My rent's due. I'm sharp, and I've got to quit. Right? Got to quit. I got to quit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's the logical side.
Yep.
You know, and we all get stuck in that, right? And so, but I liked his other words. He says, diversify your experience. He didn't say diversify your opinions or your thoughts. He said diversify your experiences. That's interesting. So, deep. Good conversation, man. Good stuff. Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for joining the Power Hour. And thank you, Danny. Great insights. We appreciate you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Herdy.